Greetings, friends. Today is Sunday, March 8th, 2026, and this is an update to my trading system. The last video that I put out on my trading system was about a year ago, and like all things in trading, my system is constantly evolving, and I feel like a lot of the changes that have come into play over the last 12 to 18 months have really been exceptional and increased the accuracy of my trading system. So today we're going to go over the primary components of my trading system. And then we're going to go over some key examples of some of the best trades I had in 2025 using the system. So first, the key components to my trading system, first foundational, is technical analysis. So I assume when a person comes into my Discord or Patreon group that they have a foundational knowledge of technical analysis. I teach a lot of things pertaining to technical analysis, but I assume that a person has a base understanding of how to read price action, how to understand chart patterns, and to use basic indicators like RSI and moving averages. If you are new to technical analysis in general, I invite you to explore learning technical analysis, and I offer just my favorite, the place where I learned technical analysis, and is through the Chart Guys. I'm not giving them a plug because I get anything for it. It's because I actually believe in their system, and it's where I learned. I started studying with them in 2016, and as far as a system that just straight up uses technical analysis and pure price action and chart patterns, they're not selling. They have a few of their own indicators that are quite good actually, but really they just teach you how to read price action, and I think that's the foundation of everything. Because if you don't understand how to read price action, then it's really hard to apply all the timing tools that I am using and teaching. So the second component to my system then is time cycle analysis. And I do time cycle analysis from various different methods. So I've studied Gann, Bear, Gene Long, McWhorter. I have a bookshelf full of books that I've studied, PDFs, you name it. But essentially, when I started using the time trades software, that was when I was able to really quickly start applying this, everything that I had been studying, and really make light years of progress. And so I use what I've developed as my primary foundation of my system is called what I call time cycle pivot harmonics. And I measure those using a time trades indicator called the ruler. And so here is an example of what those time cycle pivots look like on the chart. And essentially what I'm doing with these is I am able to pick any anchor spot on a existing technical analysis chart in TradingView, and I drop that ruler at an anchor point. So for example, if we just use this is an example. I have anchored this one to March 12th of 2024, and I have selected the Mars-Pluto cycle at 40 degrees, and I run it forward 40 degrees. And this is a weekly chart, and so my goal with the pivot harmonics is to identify points where the weekly chart is going to change its tone. And so it's been a hot topic of what exactly is a pivot. And the way I define a pivot is that it is a change in tone, not necessarily a change in trend in the market. A pivot can lead to a change in trend in the market. But for example, let's use the most recent price action here on Bitcoin for an example. So here you go. This was a Saturn-Pluto 1.6 degree harmonic. And you can see that pretty much every time we reach this harmonic, there is a change in tone. So price here was moving down drastically. We bumped into, and this is what I call a cluster, actually. We had two different harmonics. It's two or more is a cluster that strike on the same time period. So these both hit the same week, the week of November 17th. And we indeed had a pivot low, meaning our big move to the downside stopped and we started to chop around. Then the next component of how I read my time cycles pivots is that when you see a period where we have these time cycle pivots cluster, or not clustered, but consecutively striking. So that usually indicates a period of volatility. And then when you see a period where there are no time cycle pivots, that's typically a directional move. Now, no system works 100% of the time. It's trading, and we're trying our best to master uncertainty in the markets. And so I say that caveat because my time cycle pivots, I vet them, I back test them, and I want them to be working a minimum of 70% of the time, but I prefer them to be working 90% of the time. And what I do is I go through a process of pruning them. So because time cycles, just like price patterns, they shift and they change. So I have time cycles that have been running for years. As a matter of fact, on the Dow Jones, I have time cycle measurements that I've been running since 1929 or 1914, and they're still valid. They're still accurate. Do they hit 100% of the time? Not usually. Usually they hit between 70 and 90% of the time. And that is a big enough edge for me, because then I use price action as my defining tool to identify when a pivot is occurring. So for example, we had this cluster of pivots here. And then if we zoom into the daily chart over here, and I use different measurements on the daily than I do on the weekly. And so it's kind of like you have fractal patterns within price. So for example, if you're inside a monthly downtrend, then you would zoom into the daily chart to see if you're inside a daily downtrend as well. So you have fractal price patterns. You also have fractal time patterns. So we are anticipating a weekly pivot low here. This is our example on the week of November 17th. So then I go in, sorry, I was a little bit off on the chart. Then we go over here. We go into the daily chart on the week of the 17th. And we look for a reversal pattern. And so this is then where I default back to number one component of my system is you must be able to read price action. And so this is right here, a long wick indicates buying, right? We didn't fully get a reversal pattern because a reversal pattern is going to be a close above the high of the low bar until about 3 days later. And then we did indeed get our reversal here, but we weren't able to really get very far. So this is then where I would use fibs. So, and this is kind of, I'm going down the rabbit hole here with exactly how I would define this. So here we go. If we run the fib off of the high from just this big down move here, anything above, anything that rejects at the 38.2% retracement level is clearly bearish. 50%, if it makes it to the 50% level, that's what I call the in-between zone. So if it's unable to clear the golden pocket or the 50% zone here, then you're looking at each level here when you're in a trending environment, right? So in this move here, we're in a weekly and a daily downtrend. So we're watching for a rejection after we got our weekly pivot. The other way I would run this fib is I would actually start it right up here. And this was actually how I was using this at the time. So that's the most recent move. But once you see that we did in fact get our weekly pivot, right? And price has changed its tone. It's no longer moving straight down. Now we've shifted to a choppy or a range trading environment, right? Because you have two primary different modes or behaviors that you're going to see in the market. One is going to be range trading and the other one is going to be directional moves. And range trading takes place about 70% of the time. So when you see this shift in tone, so we shifted from a strong directional move down into a sideways choppy trading range. So at that point, then I run my fib from the actual high of that weekly move. And you can see that we got this solid rejection at the 382 right here. And then if we head back over to our weekly chart, you can see that rejection at the 382 on the weekly, if you would have run your fib just straight on the weekly, gave you a clean entry for a pivot high using the weekly pivot harmonic of Saturn-Pluto 1.6 before the next move down. Now, this was interesting because I was anticipating a little bit more choppy price behavior here because we did have this series of pivot harmonics here, but price action was skipped over this one right here and headed straight down into our pivot low then here on February 2nd. Another important piece of using the pivot harmonics is on the weekly, they get a plus or minus 1 week orb. So I call that the time band that I'm looking for a pivot to manifest. And then on the daily, I'm using plus or minus 1 day typically, but it can be 2 days. So if we back up a little bit and talk about, I started out day trading. And very short-term swing trading. And so that was really the primary focus. So like you see my Bitcoin chart here and it's just full of daily harmonics because I was trying to trade, I was trading the shorter term swings for years actually. And so when I first started the Astro Edge report, I actually had a focus on shorter term trading and day trading. And then I realized pretty quickly as I was applying my system that it actually was I was more successful and I was more profitable if I was identifying longer term swing trades. And that's something could be a topic of another video and can be discussed you can look at it from your own natal charts point of view and see what is stronger for you to be trading short term or long term. And then I have this whole analysis that I actually saw at some point I'm going to make a video on about the New York Stock Exchange and the inherent nature of the markets are tricky. And the idea or the illusion of fast and furious, growing your account very quickly with a small amount of money, being over leveraged and underfunded is really one of the primary reasons that people fail in trading, or at least new traders do anyway. So I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to a patient, grounded approach. And as the longer I trade, the longer my time horizon becomes. And so then let's flip back to our, not that one. Here we go. Our key components page. So those are the time cycle pivot harmonics. Then I have heliocentric and geocentric planetary cycles. And I identify planetary cycles from a myriad of different tools, but primarily my original tool that I was using was just using heliocentric and geocentric natal charts. And so, for example, here is the Bitcoin heliocentric natal chart. And there are just some key components that are different about a heliocentric versus a geocentric chart. The heliocentric chart imagines that the sun is in the middle and that you're looking at it where the planets and the asteroids are from on the longitudinal scale from the perspective of the sun. And then a geocentric chart, which is from the Earth's perspective. This is a geocentric Bitcoin chart here. You can see that they're a little bit different. You would imagine that you are standing here in the center of the Earth and you are looking at where the planets are relative to your position here on the Earth from a longitudinal perspective. And so you get an exact 180 degree opposite difference between the sun and the Earth, depending on which perspective you're looking at. The Earth sees the sun sees the Earth. And they're always going to be diametrically opposed. And then the inner planets are going to be at different places because from the sun's perspective, the inner planets don't have retrograde motion. But from the Earth's perspective, the inner planets do have retrograde motion. And so the interplanetary positions are quite often different from the geocentric and heliocentric perspective. But at the end of the day, what I do is I use these charts to identify what the key cycles are for any given asset class. So for example, if we go back to our Bitcoin example, I was running a Mars-Pluto cycle. Now, how did I think of that? Because there's lots of planets and they're doing lots of different things. So how would I come up with that? Well, I used the Bitcoin heliocentric natal chart and I noticed that Mars and Pluto are exactly conjunct at 0 degrees of Capricorn on the Bitcoin natal chart. And so whenever you get an exact conjunction, that is very often a ruling cycle, particularly on a heliocentric chart. And so that's just a brief overview of how I'm finding cycles and then applying them. And I mean, when you look at this chart represents many, many hours of my research and analysis that I've come to create to create these cycles that work in this way. So there's some component of enjoying the research, if you will, that has to be done when you're looking for these time cycle pivots. So then the other way that I use heliocentric and geocentric cycles is I just look for patterns, right? So I build analogs, and the analogs are price action from different cycles that are correlated, that the cycles are correlated. So for example, these are Venus analogs, and this would be the topic of a whole other video, but essentially you can break down Venus's cycle into different what are called elongation intervals, and they've been given intervals 1 through 6, labeled intervals 1 through 6. And I grab these different cycles from different particular times that correlate to the current cycle. And I find that price really sticks to these patterns. You know, it's like that quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? So you can grab these particular price action patterns and you can put them in places where they repeat if you know and understand the cycles and the place to put them. So again, this is where time cycle analysis is just a serious edge, giving us the opportunity to know where we're at in the current and existing cycles and what echoes we're experiencing from past cycles. Okay, so then there's a lot more that I do with the cycles as well. It's, you know, I also will find, for example, this is actually a great example. Let's use silver. So back in 2025, and I was going to share this post. So this is in my Discord, what the monthly, I do a monthly Astro Edge post, and also the Astro Edge report, which is a full 50-page newsletter that comes out with my forecasts for the primary assets being the US equity index, gold, silver, the dollar, Bitcoin, and Nifty. But then I make a post here in the Discord with the forecast. And so if we scroll down to the silver forecast, this post was from November of 2025. And in the November of 2025 Astro Edge report, I said in my forecast, this month I'll be looking for a long entry on the low of the 20-week cycle and a weekly higher low on silver. And so then if we head over here and we go back to where that was on silver, this was one of the better trades of the year. I mean, I had a few excellent trades on gold and silver last year. So here we are. We had found the high of this cycle correlated with our cluster and consecutive pivot harmonics here. We saw our period of consolidation. I was using a heliocentric Mercury-Jupiter cycle to identify when the next big move would begin, which was anticipated to begin. And this is also in the forecast. So you can see this month, the heliocentric Mercury will make an ingress into the sign of Cancer on November 25th and form a conjunction to heliocentric Jupiter on November 27th. I expect this to be a favorable period for gold and silver. It's noted that Helio-Mercury would be at perihelion on the 23rd, moving quickly, which is correlated to volatility in the metals markets. So if we take a look at what happened during this period of time, here we are. We were looking for, and I haven't talked about the traditional time cycles, the Hurst cycles that I use yet. That'll be next. But we were looking for the low of the 20-week cycle here. And we were anticipating volatility in this range on the daily chart here. We had daily pivots here. And we knew that we had the move coming that we were anticipating with the Helio-Mercury conjunct Jupiter cycle. And so this is where I got long. And, you know, this was an incredible parabolic move. Right here. So this is just one example of how I use the time cycle pivot harmonics and how I share them in the Discord and put the system to work. All right, let's go back to the list of the key components. Okay, so actually I'm going to go to Hurst time cycles next because I think that's really important. So the Hurst time cycles, if you're not familiar with them, I highly recommend. This is actually where I learned them originally, is from my friend Juan Villaverde. He has taken a really exceptional course that he made, and he has made it free on YouTube. So I highly recommend, if you don't know how to use Hurst time cycles, that this is where you go and you learn how to do that. It's really worth the hours of time that you'll put in to learn the Hurst time cycle system. So to give a brief overview, just like we have, the fractal price patterns, we have the fractal time patterns from a more standard time measurement using days and weeks. So when I'm using the pivot harmonics, I'm measuring degrees of a planetary cycle. But when I'm using the Hurst cycles, I'm using Earth days, Earth weeks, which is different than if I'm measuring degrees of Mars movement, right? And so they're just different ways of finding different patterns. But what's really brilliant about the traditional time cycle method is that a time cycle is measured low to low, typically. I actually have done some exercises of measuring some high to high in cycles, and that's useful as well. But the traditional time cycle is measured low to low. And so, for example, on Bitcoin runs an 80-day cycle. It runs a 34-week cycle. It also runs what I've found is a 15-month cycle. I believe Juan teaches a 16-month cycle. But I've been using a 15-month cycle and then a 45-month cycle. And so what I find is that when we know that we're looking for the low of one of these cycles, this is one of my favorite trade setups, because of course you prefer a low in an uptrend. Let's actually scoot back here on Bitcoin and let's look at there was a great Bitcoin trade actually. Let's see, in the Discord that I put out back around the election in 2024. Let's go back there and we'll talk about that one. So let's see, here we are. 2024. It was right in here. Okay, so here we are. Here was the election before we had this big move up. So you can see that here we were looking for a 20-week cycle low. That's what these light blue or light purple bars are. We were looking for a low of the 20-week cycle here. And I actually don't have it pulled up to reference everything, but actually if we go back even further, let's use this example here because we have a 34-week cycle low due as well. And so when you have higher time frame cycle lows due, so this 34-week cycle measured the low from September of 23 to the low of June 24th of 2024. So we know that within that 34-week cycle, it's going to break down and have multiple 80-day cycles. So we're going to be looking for, and then within the 80-day cycle, it'll break down and we'll have, 20-day cycles. So inside the 80-day cycle is a 20-day cycle. So we know that if we're looking for the low of three major cycles, a 34-week, a 80-day, and a 20-day, that gives us a very high probability area to be scouting. And then we can use all of the other tools that we have to try to find that low. So what I'm doing ultimately is layering. I'm layering the traditional Hurst time cycles on top of the pivot harmonics and price action. And we're fine. And then ultimately what my system has evolved into is finding these high probability pivot lows, preferably in an uptrend, for like in the silver example, right? We are finding high probability pivot lows, and then you buy that pivot low because the next 20% of any given cycle is typically is up. Because if you're measuring a cycle from low to low, then the next phase of the next cycle has to be up because that's what defines the low, right? So for example, here's a 29-day cycle because silver runs a 29-day cycle. And so you have right here, the low of our 29-day cycle aligned perfectly with the low that we were scouting of the 20-week cycle that also aligned with the heliocentric aspect pattern where I was anticipating a big move to follow. And it also lined up with the daily pivot harmonic. And so this is pretty much the confluence that I'm looking for when I'm setting up trades. And then I'm sharing those trades in my Discord or those trade setups and my own research and analysis in the Astro Edge report. And then I'm posting in the Discord. In the Discord, there are a series of different channels So the orientation channel, that's where, for example, this video will be found, because a new person comes into the Discord and there's some educational material that you would find there. And the Astro Edge Report channel has where I post the links to the Astro Edge Report. And this is, for example, the most recent Astro Edge Report. And we'll just walk through real quick how it's used. So the front page just has a list of the primary key astro events and economic events that are happening. And then we have a table of contents. This is educational material to help you understand how to read what I'm talking about. And then the first phase of the first, 5 to 10 pages of the report cover all of the financial astrology events. So it covers the key themes and then each individual event and what I'm tracking, and whether that is something I'm tracking interpretively or whether it's something I'm tracking technically as a very precise pivot point or entry point for a trade. And then we have the charts to go with that. And then it goes asset class by asset class. This is the Dow Jones. We go, and then for the U.S. equities, I do the Dow Jones, I do the S&P and the NASDAQ. And then the way that's set up is that I share high probability pivot and strong move dates from the Time Trades AI forecast, which is a tool that is available through, it's available through the Time Trades subscription service to their website. And you can subscribe there. If you want to subscribe to Time Trades to try it out, you can use the coupon code COSMIC12. They also have a 15-day trial. But I post the AI forecast there, which is really very useful in the Astro Edge Report. And then I also post all of my analysis with my weekly and daily time cycle pivots. They're available for you to use because I'm not running a call service. I'm not a financial advisor, and I'm not giving financial advice. What I'm doing is providing my time cycle analysis to you to implement into your system as a guide, because it's a serious edge and it has leveled up my trading system, my profitability, and my accuracy significantly as I've cultivated this edge. So this is the Astro Edge Report, and it's available to Astro Edge members and posted in the Discord there on the Astro Edge Report. Then another component of the subscription is what's called the Cosmic Calendar. And this is, for example, the calendar from March 1st. It's just got the daily pivots and the weekly pivots and the prime astro events listed on the calendar. I created this originally for myself because it was nice to just be able to have a quick view on any given day of which assets I was looking at or tracking for a move or a pivot. And day traders or shorter term swing traders can use this to help identify swings in the indexes or on Nifty, gold or Bitcoin or silver or the dollar. And so that comes out every week. And then I have all of these other channels. I've really tried to organize. There's a lot of channels, and I know that can be overwhelming for people sometimes, but I really try to organize everything by sector so that it can be easily found. So the announcement channels are where only I post, except for the macro channel. That is our in-house macro economist, Jared, and he posts in the macro education channel. But pretty much everything has its own announcement channel by sector. And then the most recent addition that I have made is called Charts on Watch. And this is really this was a shift this was something I added last year. And then beginning this year, I made a shift in the structure. Instead of forecasting just the five basic asset classes I was covering every week, now I forecast those monthly and bi-weekly. And on the every other week, I have cultivated this channel called Charts on Watch, where I'm posting the setups for my top watches, my own personal top watches for my own personal trades. I've started doing a video weekly that will cover those trade setups. And then I just got this sorted out, which is a trade tracking spreadsheet for my individual trades. And so this is just how this looks here by sector. This is the commodity sheet. There'll be a commodity sheet and an equity sheet. And then it gives the price targets. It gives what's called the white fib level, which is a time trades tool that is a very key support and resistance level. And it's giving the 20-week and the 40-week cycle lows. And this is all information for you to incorporate into your system to help you execute your own trades. It's not necessarily a call service. If you come in and you say, I'm going to buy wood right now, for example, but I was buying wood, 2 months ago. So it's up to you to take a look at where these cycles are at. You put them on your chart, and you can put them on your chart with ease, actually. If we take a look at the chart, how easy it is to actually drop a time cycle, just a traditional time cycle on your chart. It's free and it's easy. You just grab this tool called Date Range in TradingView, and you just drop it on wherever you want, and it'll count your bars for you. So if you want to put an 80-day cycle on Bitcoin, just run your bar out 80 days and you're like, oh, okay, look, wow, okay. We were due for an 80-day cycle low right here when we got this major pivot low back here in February. So, this is how I hope that people will come to understand and then implement my tools into their own system to help you become more successful and more profitable at what you're doing. Okay, everybody, that was kind of a long story, but that's it. That's the summary of my system. And of course, there's more nuanced details there because I use, there's other things that I could go in more in depth on, is the analogs that I use, the sacred mathematics, which are, Fibonacci, Lucas numbers. Those are just kind of the most well-known things, but there's a lot of other sacred mathematics tools and geometry that I use in markets. And financial astrology can be interpretive or very technical depending on how you look at it. But I use all of this stuff to synthesize into what I have to share in my analysis with you guys. If you found this video useful, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can even turn on the bell notifications so that you don't miss any updates from me. I also offer individualized astrology readings, and you can book those through my website, margoamala.com. You can also join my Discord to access my monthly newsletter, the Charts on Watch channels, and my biweekly updates, as well as a growing chat community. We have some awesome people in our community, actually, just sharing all kinds of great knowledge. So you can join directly through Discord, link in the video description below. You can also join through Patreon. You can also find me on X, or formerly Twitter, and my Twitter handle is also listed in the video description below. All right, everybody, I hope you all have a great trading week, and we'll see you next time.